And welcome back to the program. It's the Vicki McKenna Show. Standing by on the Home Center Store hotline. Home Center Store. Good people with the right stuff. Kubota, LS Tractor, and Cub Cadet. Is Rick Esenberg from the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty to talk about using my retirement money, and it's already happening to my 401k, using my retirement money to float a progressive political agenda. Now, I don't even know how that could even possibly pass the constitutional smell test, Rick. And thankfully, Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty has filed for an injunction of the Biden administration's rule to do exactly that. Good to have you, by the way.
Well, thanks for having me on.
How do they get away with this when... we should maybe define fiduciary responsibility. Fiduciary responsibility never includes, on no planet, is the definition of fiduciary responsibility using other people's money to float our political agenda. That I look too. It's not there.
Yeah. So the key here is the ERISA Act, which sets up what most of us are familiar with as 401k accounts, although it's a little bit broader than that. And there are fiduciaries that make investments for your account. And what they are supposed to do is they're supposed to focus on risk and return. Right? They're supposed to invest the money in a way so that you can make more money without taking on undue risk. What the Biden administration did here is it promulgated a rule which said that risk and return, it simply declared the risk and return can include ESG factors. Now, by ESG, we mean environmental, social, and governance. I think that for our purposes, your description of them as a progressive political agenda is absolutely correct. Now, if in fact taking these things like climate change or diversity was relevant to risk and return, there would be no need for the rule because a fiduciary would have to take those things into account anyway. And so specifically authorizing this, declaring that ESG factors are magically within the scope of consideration of risk and return is essentially a blank check for fiduciaries to use these considerations to, in effect, virtue signal with your money. And that's something that we don't think ought to happen, and we don't think is permitted by ERISA. So we think the Biden administration has exceeded its statutory authority, and that's why we sued.
It's a layup, Rick. It's a layup. Okay? I mean, they do this in the event that they're going to be able to float it, and they do this to send a signal to begin the process of orienting your business to ESG so that you will be part of the investment strategy for Fidelity or whoever else is managing your 401k. And so I hope you're successful quickly, because my concern is you'll have the corporate infrastructure begin changing so that everybody is essentially investing in ESG, whether there's an ESG rule or not.
Well, sir, we're seeking a preliminary injunction. And of course, you're making a good point. And the point is that if fiduciaries start to act in this way, if they're given a green light to act in this way, then businesses will have not just an incentive, but also almost a compulsion to make sure that they satisfy whatever ESG requirements these investment advisors impose upon them. Even if that would not be something that they would ordinarily do to maximize their profits.
Right.
So, yeah, we're moving for a preliminary injunction. I would never call it a layup. Nothing's a layup in this business, but we do think it's something that needs to be resisted. And this is only a Department of Labor rule. There are other actions which are contemplated or in process by the Biden administration, which would also seek to advance this form of investment.
It's what you've got going on. You've got all agencies under a DEI order. You've got Joe Biden promulgating a rule saying, feel free to take our $35 trillion in aggregate investment to float your political agenda. That's the total value of American retirement savings and 401k investment. So maybe it's maybe it's $25 trillion, still a lot. And then you've got the Biden administration on the other side of the private sector as well, saying that every single agency will put everything through a DEI analysis, and that includes agencies that regulate private businesses. So if they're putting everything through a DEI analysis, then you get put through a DEI analysis if you are a regulated business in the United States. It's almost like they're trying to shell us so fast that groups like yours, can't catch up because the courts move slowly.
Yeah, and you have to keep in mind, Vicki, that this has to do with somebody who has a 401k account, and their money is being managed by somebody else. Certainly there are funds that might advance a particular political outlet, or there are Catholic funds for people that want to invest their money only in businesses that are managed in accordance with Catholic values. We can all decide to do that on our own, but this is different. This is when an investment advisor is taking, as you say, trillions of dollars that belong to millions of people and imposing his or her own values on how their money is invested. And that's not something that could happen. If these things are relevant to risk and return, there's no need to change the rules, because risk and return are also always a requirement for fiduciaries. This is attempting, I think, to give them leeway to do something that they can't do without this promulgation of the rule.
Well, they can't do it. They do it. And then again, dare you to sue. And, and I'm pleased you did this. But how many times have you sued the Biden administration? 8?
I think this is I'm trying to remember whether this is 7 or 8. But I don't focus on it too much because 9 will be coming up pretty soon.
No kidding. 9, I hope, is the DEI rule that says everybody's got to practice illegal racial discrimination, unless or else. You must violate Civil Rights Act law or else. And then you have to make everybody else violate it too, because again, we're going to pretend that somehow this comports with the Constitution. It's just stunning to me that it barely gets any attention except, by right-leaning, center-right media. This is not the stuff that is on every single nightly newscast. Holy cow, imagine if Trump had said, what we're going to do? We're going to take everybody's 401k and we're going to say it's okay to invest in conservative causes with that $25 trillion because that'll help the conservatives. I mean, it wouldn't even make it to the rule-making stage. That's what it's so fatiguing.
No, so you can contrast with the ESG rule that was in place during the Trump administration. What that said was, okay, you can take these factors into account if they're relevant to risk and return, but you have to show your work. You have to document why you took them into account. Those requirements are removed by the newly promulgated rule. And I think that the reason that they're removed is that this is intended to be a broad warrant for
they were down. They were losing 17 to 20%. ESG funds were losing 17 to 20%. These are dogs. Every time you have to show your work, that's when all of the ESG falls apart. I want ground source heat pumps instead of the traditional model. Well, what's the return on investment? Well, it really isn't one. Never mind. So if you have ESG with no rules and no demand that you show that this is actually going to be an effective investment strategy, then we're just going to be investing in funds that lose money all the time. And when they lose money, you just go take more of Americans' 401k savings and investment, and you make sure you prop up those funds.
Yeah, and I think particularly, in the situation where we are now, where you have increasing number of baby boomers that are retiring, you have Social Security, which is,
on the
like
brink.
it or not, it's on the brink, whether the Democrats and the Republicans want to admit it, it's on the brink. And I think weakening the performance of 401k funds is never a good idea. It's always taking somebody else's money. but it's a prelude for disaster in a situation
Amen.
like the one we may be facing in a few years.
Right on. Thanks, Rick Esenberg, for coming on the program today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
You can read all about this. In fact, you can read the brief if you go to the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty website at will-law.org.